Okay, so the text you're looking at comes from an organization in Israel who is responsible for essentially the outreach organization in Israel. And they encourage members of the community to do what we're doing here, sharing the shofar with other people. So they selected passages from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe's Code of Jewish Law, that are pertinent for one who is blowing the shofar. So that's what we're going to do. So it's not that long. It's only about maybe 5 or 6 pages. It's not a lot, but we're going to learn through it now. We're going to move along, and I definitely recommend reviewing it so that you're familiar with all the halachos. As you learn, you'll see which details are important to remember and which ones are less important to remember, but I definitely recommend learning it and reviewing it again so you know all the things. Okay, so let's start right from the page, the third page, I think, right? Right, it's page 3 on the bottom. Yeah. Okay.
You're skipping the first one?
No, we're starting Simon Tov Kuf Pei Hey. It's page 3. We're not reading the introduction, no. They're just writing their invite, thanking everybody for joining this project and whatever. Okay. Makam Matkei, the place where one would blow the shofar. One should be standing when they are sounding the shofar. As the verse reads, Yom Kippur Yelachem, a day of blasting which shall be for you. And later it says, Sfartim Lachem, you shall count for you. So the verse says, a day of blasting for you. And then it says as well, with respect to counting Omer, a day of counting for you. Malachem Omer Sham, just like the you referred to there with respect to counting Omer Mu'umad, one has to be standing. Commotion is bar b'simin top base test. It's explained in that thing. And the third page should be right there in the top right. Afkan, so to here, this is all just selections from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. It just kept the parts that are pertinent for, like, knowing for halacha. So Afkan, so to here, with respect to sounding the shofar from Umad, one has to be standing. Nevertheless, if he inadvertently was sitting when he blew the shofar, Yatza, he still fulfills the obligation. Hashem Natzkiyas, those who hear the shofar, even if they have not fulfilled their obligation yet. So this is the first time they're hearing the shofar, and with this they're fulfilling the mitzvah. Nonetheless, they don't have to stand. Okay, so this is the first halacha you have to know. You're standing when you sound the shofar, and the one listening doesn't have to stand. This is not so important for those going on Mitzvah, but it's the custom that they blow the shofar in the place where the Torah is read. It's appropriate to give, to honor a tzaddik, and somewhere it's appropriate to lead the sounding of the shofar, but so long as there's no dispute in the matter. Okay, so that's the first thing. Standing, people listening to you sitting. The brachas. Before he blasts the shofar, he should make the bracha. One who has commanded us and sanctified us with his mitzvahs and commanded us to sound or to hear the sound of the shofar. You should not say lishmaya bikal shofar, to listen. In English, the translation doesn't work, but in Hebrew, the mashmal tzayis l'kol ha-shofar, the implication would be you have to heed the call of the shofar. If you were to put the bays, big kol shofar, as if to say the shofar is giving commands and you have to listen to it. That's what it would sound like. That's what it would. Yes, obey the shofar, exactly. Big kol shofar would be listen, hearken to the command of the shofar, as opposed to just listen to the shofar, as in the sound of it. That's right. In Bikol Shmo, if you shall hearken to his voice, that's what it would happen if you were to put the bays before the word koil. Why don't we make the bracha thanking Hashem for the mitzvah of blowing the shofar while listening to the voice of the shofar? And this is important to know this. The mitzvah is not the sounding of the shofar, not the blowing. The primary mitzvah is to hear the sound, not the act of blowing it, but the listening of the sound. There's all kinds of halachas that are related to this, but for example, someone who steals a shofar, you still fulfill the command, still fulfill the mitzvah. The reason why you still fulfill the mitzvah is because the mitzvah is not the blowing of it, it's the sound of it. And the sound wasn't stolen, the sound is just a sound. That's what the Rambam paskins. After he makes his bracha, he says, Shechiyanu, mitzvah abam is man, because the mitzvah only comes once a year. Okay. Someone who is sounding the shofar for himself, now this is important for us. Someone who's sounding the shofar for himself, and he's doing it for somebody else to fulfill their obligation, which is what God willing will be doing. He also makes these 2 brachas. But when is this true that you make the brachas? If the one listening to you does not have to make the blessings, then you make the blessings. If the person listening knows how to make the brachas, then Yavarech Ba'atzman, the one listening, should make the bracha. And the person who is listening to the shofar now for the first time should not fulfill their obligation by listening to a bracha of someone who already fulfilled their obligation, which is us. Because when we're going to be in shul, we will have fulfilled our obligation. And because the mitzvah is not to blow the shofar, the mitzvah is to sound the shofar, then the people who are hearing this, because the mitzvah is not to sound the shofar, the mitzvah is to hear the shofar, those who are hearing the shofar are actually fulfilling the mitzvah, not you sounding it. And therefore you don't make the bracha, they should make the bracha. It's only if they can't, then you make the bracha and they say amen. But they should be making the bracha. Now on that subject, they quote from a different section out there with Shulchan Aruch, which is with respect to women making a bracha. And this is another important factor for halacha, practical stuff, as you're going to be on the road and likely women there. Okay, so Hashlama Mesim and Tovka Petes, they're bringing another section from another chapter to conclude this topic. Nalgo Hadnashim, it's a custom that women have, to make brachas on any time-bound mitzvahs, which they are ordinarily not obligated to do. So eating in the sukkah, shaking the lulav, blowing the shofar, there's a time-bound mitzvahs that are positive commandments. They're not obligated in these mitzvahs. But nonetheless, they still make a bracha. This has become the practice that women don't make brachas. Oh yes, I've heard that. Good point. But our minhag is certainly that women do make the bracha. But a man who already fulfilled his obligation cannot make the bracha for her to listen and say amen to. And the ve'enim toiken not b'shul hanashim, and he cannot just blow the shofar for just the woman, meaning the bracha. Because that would be a wasted bracha. Why? Because the women themselves are not obligated in this blessing. That we're now going to obligate the man to make the bracha that she's not obligated to hear anyway, so she can fulfill the obligation. It's they themselves who have taken it in their own hands to make the bracha, because they have permission to do so. Mitamshin bar Hashem as explained elsewhere. But somebody else, why should he make a bracha for no reason? So in other words, when it comes to, it would seem that if you're making a bracha for a man, if you're blowing shofar for a man who doesn't know how to make the brachas, then best is the person makes the bracha, the person listening. If they can't, you make the bracha and the person says amen. But if it's a woman, it seems like you can't do that. And you just go straight to blowing the shofar and fulfill the mitzvah that way, even without the bracha.
Just tell them to repeat it.
But they should make, so the Maisa, if you're in a crowd of people, you should have one of the men make the bracha and everybody else says amen. And if it's a crowd of just women and children, then the woman can make the bracha. But one of the women should make the bracha. So Mitzvah Shem, when you guys go out, we're going to have cards with the brachas printed on it, with some other psukim, so that people can read it in Hebrew and in what's it called? Transliteration, phonetic transliteration. We'll have that available for those going out there. This is important to know this. So we have two halachos that are practical so far. Number one, you're standing while you blow the shofar, even if other people are sitting, that's okay. And the second thing is, the people listening should make the bracha, and if it's available, a man should do so. If the man can't, you make the bracha, the other person says amen. It's a lot of details to remember, but that's what I'm saying, to review this.
The ladies don't know, they'll say repeat after
It doesn't,
you. You say Baruch.
yeah, you can say baruch, they repeat after you, yeah. In other words, they're making the bracha, you're just helping them along, yeah. Okay, now after making these two blessings, yitka tashrat, which stands for tkiya, shvarim, trua, tkiya, gimel pomim, do that 3 times in a row. The tashat, tkiya, shvarim, trua, 3 times, and then gimel pomim, and then tarat, tkiya, trua, tkiya 3 times. Just quickly glance at the very last page. They have there a diagram, and you should keep a copy of this and carry it with you, so you can visualize it as you're blowing. You see, it's in, so and under it they have it written out. So if you like the visual aid or written out, either way, keep this page. It's very clear and very neat, and that way you won't get mixed up. Because as we're going to learn soon, making mistakes, knowing when you have to repeat yourself when you're making a mistake, is itself very detailed and complex. So best to try not to make a mistake when you're blowing the shofar, because it becomes problematic. Okay, so let's continue then. We are on left-hand side, top page 3. Shel piv, if you can, best to blow the shofar on the right side of your mouth. And if he's capable of doing so. If you're not comfortable doing it, don't do that. Better to get the blasts correct. Why? Because the verse reads that the Satan stands on the right side and therefore blow the shofar on the right side. But Tkiya is like, pushes away, confuses the satan, and therefore put it on your right side of your mouth if you can. Okay. It's best to have the mouth, the top of the shofar, facing upwards rather than down, rather than the side or down. Better facing upwards because the pasuk says, God arises in Teruah, so it should be facing upward. Okay, ches. If a person begins to blow shofar and he can't conclude them, that's okay. Give somebody else the shofar to do so. Given COVID, make sure you wipe that down before you give it to somebody else. It happens, you're blowing 5, 10, 15 times in a day and get tired in the middle. If you can actually even do it more than one shofar, that's a good point. So if you both have a shofar, you can stop middle and let the other person continue. In fact, does he have it here? I think he has it here, but not mistaken, the halacha is you can hear the shofar staggered throughout the whole day, in theory. Certainly the Rambam, I'm pretty sure that's the halacha as well. Yeah. But the bottom line is, if you get tired, you can have somebody else take you over. Okay, this is something that's not so important for us, but the custom is that one who leads the shachar service is the one who tells the one who's blowing the shofar which thing come next. So in other communities, in Ashkenazi communities, there's a person who says the word tekiah, and then the person blows tekiah, and he says shivarim, and then he blows shivarim through, and he really literally announces everything. But over here, we just point. So if you're going with somebody else, maybe the other person can help you and point at the words as you're saying them. It'll be very helpful. Okay, so custom is that the person announces, say the tekiah, word for word, tekiah, shvarim, tvarim, etc. It's a good custom so that people don't get mixed up. Okay, and now they're quoting, just to conclude this section, they're quoting from elsewhere in the Shulchan Aruch, which reads, Zman tekiah shofar b'yoyim, the mitzvah of hearing the shofar during the day, as the word pasuk reads, Yom Teruah, it's a day of blasting. B'yoyim lebelela, day, not at night. B'cholim kosh tekiah shofar, all day long one can hear the shofar. Mi'alai shachar, from dawn until the stars emerge. The Chacham say you should wait a little longer than just dawn. You should wait till the sun rises. So that you leave the doubt. Maybe it's still night. Okay, so important halachos that we did here is really customs that are best that you do. Right side of your mouth, shofar facing upwards, and it's okay to pass it on to somebody else if you can't conclude. Okay, now the shofar itself. Again, these aren't so important to remember every detail because these are halachas that you keep anyway, but it's good to know them. Shofar Rosh Hashanah, the shofar Rosh Hashanah mitzvah is that you be bent shofar. So that man's heart is bent to God in prayer. Any shofar that is bent is kosher, with the exception of a horn from a cow, or from an ox, because it's not called a shofar. It's called a horn. There's a difference between a shofar and a horn, as we'll explain in a moment. Remember, the verse reads, the verse refers to the ox as having horns that are elevated, but it's horns, not shofar. And the same thing is true of the horn of most animals. They are one bone. The ein shmom shofar, and therefore they're not called a shofar. Why? She'ein hanikra shofar. It's not called a shofar. Ela karnim hachalulim. Only horns that are hollow. Sheishlam zachas b'fnim, that have like a male bone going into the female bone, which is the actual shofar. That's what it is. It's I think it's called in English cartilage. There's cartilage inside the shofar that grows from the actual ram, and then this is like on top of it. And then you have to like separate it. And so in other words, it's naturally hollow, as opposed to a horn you drill a hole in. That would be like a trumpet, not a shofar. They drill the end just to get the last hole, but the hole here is hollow naturally. There's a cartilage in it that grows from the animal, and that's what makes it a shofar. That's the word shofar means. Shofar means like a tube, as he's going to say. So ela karnim halom sheisham zachas b'fnim. This only works. It's only kosher if there is a hollow shofar that has a male cartilage going in it. The niklav gidin min hazachas kagoyin shakvashim be'ilim ve'ezim. So all kinds of rams, sheep, they have this kind of shofar. Okay, shofar b'lashon shofar, because the shofar comes from the term like a tube kind of thing. But the horns of most animals, is just one bone. And therefore they are disqualified even in the second circumstance. Meaning if the only thing you had was a cow's horn, it's useless. Don't use it. Okay, so that's why I said it's not so pertinent today, because today we buy shofars in the shops and they give it to us ready-made and beautiful. Okay, and likewise, moitzim and mufchar, it's the best kind of shofar, right? You can use all kinds of shofar. It could be any qualifying shofar. He says sheep, rams, and goats. But the best is let's go have a shofar sha'ar to use a ram. Why? To remind us of the ram's horn of Isaac when he was bound on the Akedah, on that dramatic story, that moment of Mesiras Nefesh. If he doesn't have a ram's horn, he can use any other kind of any other kind of shofar except for cows and those like it, and that they have one bone, as we explained before. Even if it's a straight shofar, it's not bent. If it doesn't have a bend, you should still use that. Better use a straight ram's horn than a bent cow's horn. Because the bent is only for like an added part. Then the best case scenario, you have a bent shofar to teach you that your heart is bent. Not for like the final ruling. I'm talking about pashut. If you happen to blow from a straight shofar, you fulfill the obligation. And if it's not bent, it's the eved. Okay, it happened. Okay. Again, now the next halachos. So just like these past ones are not so important because most of them you buy them from a kosher shop. But I will say that Yossi actually brought a shofar. I didn't give him the answer yet. But you should bring your shofar to get checked if there's cracks in it. Because depending on which direction the crack goes and how big the crack is, if air comes out or not, changes the status of it being kosher. Okay, so now some more halachas related to that. So first a quote from the actual Shulchan Aruch, from the Alter Shulchan Aruch, from the Shulchan Aruch of Yosef Cairo. We're on what page are we? Page 4. What? No, we're on top of page 4, okay. Okay, if there's a hole in if there's a hole in the shofar and you close it up with something that's not the actual shofar, it's disqualified. Again, if there's a crack in your shofar, get it checked. Okay, likewise for this reason. If anything is added to the length of the shofar, like they have these designs, like these silver plates, and they're popping out the top of the shofar. And now the sound travels not through the shofar itself, but through the shofar and then through that added decoration. Whether that added part is from the shofar, from the same substance as the shofar itself. So it took another ram's horn and welded it to this one. But whether it's not from the actual shofar, it's silver, gold, whatever it is. Whether you add it at the narrow part by your mouth, whether you add it at the wide part at the end, it is disqualified because you're not listening to the sound of the shofar anymore. You're listening to the sound of the shofar plus that extra piece. Okay, if it was a long shofar and he shortened it, if it still remains the minimum amount of a shofar, it is kosher. What's the minimum amount of the size of a shofar? Tefach. It's got to be the size of a fist. So that the person blowing the shofar can hold it in his hand. That means 4 average size fingers. At least a little bit of the shofar seen from either side. That's the minimum size of the shofar. And added to this, you have to make sure that your mouth is not, your finger should not be between you and the shofar. Because then you have the same problem. You're listening to the sound of your finger, not the shofar. The shofar should be on your lips, not your finger between it. You can put your mouth directly close to it. You can put your hand directly close to your lips, but the shofar should be touching your lips. Okay. Like he says here, there should be no separation between the lips of the one blowing and the shofar itself. If he plated it with gold to make it fancy in that area, puzzle, it is disqualified. Most of those halachos are not important for everybody on a daily basis because you all buy kosher shofars that have a hechsher on them and it's good to go. Okay, now we get to the halachos that are important. But first is background. You don't have to remember all the background, but it's good to know the background because that'll help you understand the halachos that follow. Okay, what is the minimum biblical obligation that the Torah requires to hear on Rosh Hashanah to fulfill the obligation? Answer, Teisha, only 9 blasts. And they are tkiya through a tkiya, tkiya through a tkiya, tkiya through a tkiya. That's it. How do we get to so many? We're going to get there. But why 3? The Torah says 3 times the words trua. Shnayim b'Rosh Hashanah, twice with respect to the mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah, Echad b'Yom Kippurim Shal Yovel, and one with respect to the Jubilee year, every 50 years in temple times that will blast the shofar on Yom Kippur. Now, with Piyash Mulamdu, we learned it by tradition, Shem Lebedim Zemized, that the shofar of Rosh Hashanah and the shofar of Yom Kippur are one. They teach each other the laws, and whatever law applies to the shofar of Rosh Hashanah applies to the law of Yovel and vice versa. And Lakach, therefore, it's as if the 3 times the Torah said the word Trua is said by each of them, even though 2 is said by Rosh Hashanah, 1 said by Yovel. It's as if all 3 of them are said by each of them. Okay, so now we know from biblical command, you have to have 3 Truas. Now, each Trua, must have a simple sound, what we call Tkiya, before, and a simple sound after. So now you know a set is the mitzvah, the Trua, and the Trua must be accompanied by a Tkiya before and Tkiya after, and that's your set. Tkiya, Trua, and Tkiya. And the Torah commands to do that 3 times. Okay. These are what's called Tkiya just ordinarily. And what's the verse? Remember the verse reads, Vavarta shofar Trua, you shall sound the shofar. But the word used to sound the shofar here is avar, which means to pass over. Mashmash sarach lahavar kol poshet. The implication is that a person has to pass a simple sound, and then he can come to his Trua. The Lashon Va'avara, because this word, Vavarta, Mashma Avara, Sakol Poshet, means to pass or to sound a simple, straight sound. As opposed to saying, let's koyash, the Kol Shofar. Vavarta sounds like to pass it through, even though it also means just to sound the Shofar. And likewise, Achar Trua Nemar Taviru Shofar. After the Torah says a Trua, it also says again, Taviru Shofar, you shall blast the Shofar. Mashmash Achar Trua, the implication is that after the Trua, there also has to be a simple sound, which is the Tkiya that comes after the Shofar. After the Trua, I'm sorry. And therefore, Trua, the same thing is true of each and every Trua, all 3 of them. Ben Shal Yovel, Ben Shal Rosh Hashanah, whether it's the Jubilee year at the end of the 50th year, the Yom Kippur, or it's Rosh Hashanah, which is in our case, Shein Lemin Mizeh, they complement each other. Okay, so far what we have is Torah says 3 times Trua, and each Trua must be accompanied by a Tkiya before and Tkiya after. Basically. Now, what's a Trua is the question. Trua Zua Amr Torah. This Trua Torah says, Mitargaminun, it's translated as Yavava. Yavava is somewhat translated as to wail or to cry. The Ksiv is the verse read, this is, never talks about this, but this is when Devoda beats the king Sisera, and the mother of Sisera is crying, looking out the window, watching her son's demise, and is crying. Okay. So the word there is Yevav, which is the translation of the word Trua. And the context there is clearly someone crying. So therefore, mashma, the implication is, Shayavava, that this word Yavava, which is the translation of the word Trua, he could kosh adam mashmir kashubaycha miyalo. It's the cry of a person who's crying and wailing. Okay, so now we know Trua means crying. But what does crying sound like? The Yesh topic, we are in doubt. Im Yavava is top of the left-hand column. Is the cry like one who is sick and is lengthening in his moaning? Oy. 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 It's a longer sound. And that's where we get the shvarim. Right? It's like a person sounding one sigh after another sigh, and the sigh is somewhat lengthened. This is called a sigh or a moan. So that's one option for what crying could mean. Or it's like someone who is like weeping and bemoaning. Bemoaning is like the word kinus. The word kinus we use to describe what we read on Tisha B'Av, same root word. The person's voicing small bursts of sounds, very small tiny sounds, very close to each other, like weeping, which is like, like a baby's crying. You hear both of these things with a baby. This is called a yalil, or weeping. So is it like moaning or weeping? So that's 2 options already. Or is it both? Hayalala, the weeping after the moaning. And this is indeed the way people cry. They sigh, and then they weep. So it could be weeping. That could be the version of what trua means. It could be moaning, or it could be moaning followed by weeping. And that's how we have the 3 sets of 3. Following? Okay. The Tiknu Chachamim, our sages, therefore instituted the Latzis de Kolasvekis, so that we cover all our bases. Let's clear out Tashat. I'm just going to say for Tashat going forward, but that means Tkiya, Shvarim, Trua, and Tkiya. Gimel Palm 3 times. Because perhaps the Trua that the Torah prescribes is both the moan and the wailing. Tashat. Then we do Tkiya, Shvarim, Trua. Tkiya shvarim tkiya, I'm sorry, gilapam 3 times. Shema trua genich levad, because perhaps moaning itself is the trua that the Torah prescribes. Which would mean, if I just did tashrat, I can't cover all my bases, because the Torah prescribes that every trua must be followed by a tkiya. Now, if the shvarim is the actual trua, then when I did tashrat, my trua was a separation between my shvarim and the tkiya that followed. And thus I have to do each set separately, right? And the Torah says that you have to do the simple sound directly after the sound before it without an interruption. The tkiya has to follow trua without an interruption. And if trua means just the shvarim, then that trua was a separation. And then and then he has to do tkiya 3 times. Shema trua, because maybe trua is the wailing alone, the weeping alone, not the moaning. And if with the moaning that was in tashrat, the shvarim hefsek ben trua tkiya shvana was an interruption between the tkiya that preceded my trua of the tashrat set. Okay, so it's important to know this, because when it comes to making mistakes and correcting yourself, you have to know, is the mistake you made an interruption between your trua and the tkiya that's about to follow? Following? Right, the mistake, if I blow the wrong thing, is that blast, does it constitute an interruption between my trua of whatever set that is, whether the trua is a trua itself, whether the trua is a shvarim, whether the trua is a shvarim and a trua? The mistake I made, is it considered an interruption between that and the tkiya that follows? And that's going to depend on what kind of mistake and what's its relationship to the set I'm in. Because it all comes down to this halacha here. Following? So all this is background to see how we got to 3 times tashrat, 3 times tarat, and 3 times tashrat. With me, Yossi? Following? Okay. Now, the length of the tkiyah is also important practically. Shir tkiyah, the measure for the tkiyah, hamor b'torah, the Torah says, is kashir trua hamor b'torah, is the same size as a trua. Now, what's a trua? The shir trua b'torah, the amount for a trua is gimel yavaves is 3 moans. Right? No, yavaves. I'm sorry. It's 3 yavaves. But what's a yavava? Is a yavava a moan or is it weeping? If it's weeping, it's much shorter. Because 3 little bursts of weeping is much shorter than the 3 moans, right? So there's like different opinions as to what size the tkiyah is. But we're going to see the conclusion is going to be simpler, even though it's going to go through different opinions here. Okay, the imrates laharachad b'chol tkiyah. If a person wants to lengthen the tkiyah, harshus b'yadai, he can do so laharachad mashirtzeh to make the tkiyah as long as he wants. The measure given for tkiyah el shofar el shlo yifchis mashir is only should not do any less than that measure. Sorry. But we know that the tkiyah is same thing as trua, and trua is 3 yavavas. Okay? We don't know, well, the 2 opinions, what a yavava is. Is it the moaning or is it the weeping? Right? But the tkiyah is the same thing as a trua, which is 3 yavavas. Okay, so you are allowed to lengthen the tkiyah though, as long as you want, but you can't go less than that. The same thing is true of trua. A person can add as many bursts as he wants in that weeping. I remember reading something that the Rebbe Marash once did 70 or something like that. Some huge amount of truas one year. Just two, going and going. The Rebbe definitely did more than 9. I wasn't there, obviously I don't remember, but so I've heard, yeah? The Rebbe did more than 9 tkiyas, more than 9 truas apparently. Okay, and likewise with the moaning, the shvarim, and moisif al gimel shvarim, if you add more than 3 of the shvarim, in b'kach klom, there's no problem. It's not as if you made an interruption between the trua of that set and the tkiyah that follows it. Because you are doing all the shvarim in one breath and all of the bursts in one breath. And here's an important halacha. If you did 4 shvarim, if you did it in one breath, that 4 shever is not an interruption between your shvarim and your tkiyah that comes afterwards. So if you took a breath, then it's a problem, it's an interruption. And that's going to become a halacha we deal with. You did 3 shvarim, took a breath, did another shever, and that was a hafsek. You have to go back to the beginning of that set, which means tkiyah before, right? But it has to be, and the same thing is true of the kamutin, of the bursts. If you did 15, it has to be in one breath. Once you catch your breath, move on to the tkiyah. Okay, so that's one opinion, that the size of the tkiyah is only the size of 3 yavavas, which is very little. Now, v'yesh those that say sheshir yavava, that the yavava itself he gimel tamutin is 3 bursts. And therefore, shir trua, the shir of trua, which is gimel yavavis, is 3 moans. Shem tes tamutin is 9 bursts. And therefore, for shir tkiya, the amount of time at the minimum for how the tkiya has to be is kashir trua gamkein tes tamutin, is the size of 9 bursts. Right? Following? Okay. Now, v'shir shvarim, in other words, according to the first opinion, according to the first opinion, that we're doing just the size of 3 yavavas, and a yavava is a small burst, then your tekiya is the size of what we do as a shever. Right? Because we do a shever the size of 3 bursts.
That's the minimum,
but if you're of the other opinion, that the yavava is trua dot 2, that means tekiya is only the size of 3, 2. That would be the size of what we call a shever. The size of what we call a shever is what the other opinion calls a tekiya.
And if it's what's it called?
If the yavava itself is 3 tamutin.
What if it's both? What if it's the weeping and this?
Okay, so we're going to see in a second. We're going to see in a moment that the end halacha is your tekiya has to be the same size as whatever is in the middle. Your tekiya should be as long as whatever's in the middle. So if you're doing shvarim trua, then your tekiya should be as long as the whole shvarim and trua together.
So 2 things in the middle have to be as long as.
Your tekiya should be at least as long as 3 shvarim plus 9 tekiyas. Truas.
Either your tekiyas have to be longer than the shvarim, or the middle has to be shorter.
No, the middle can't be shorter. Because your shvarim have to be a minimum of 3 bursts. And 3 bursts are 3 bursts. Can't get any shorter than that. So,
You do 2, or 2.
but that, if you do like 2, then how much bigger than that is 3 tekiya? That's it. A tekiya is 2. That's 3, that's 3 truas, right? And you have to do at least, okay, I guess you're right. Yeah, the shever can be very small. But you have to, okay, when it comes to the shever, I'll demonstrate in a moment when we get to the shever business.
First step, you have to do long.
That's correct. Your tekiya has to be longer than the first set, as we're going to see. Okay. Now, the shir shvarim, the shir of the amount, the size for a shever, for shvarim, the vada lepochasim shir trua cannot be less than a trua. Gamkin testamut l'chol hapachas has to reach between the 3 of them at least the size of 9 bursts. Therefore, each shever has to be at least the size of 3 bursts. So that all 3 shvarim together should not be smaller than the amount of a trua, which is 9 tamutin. Okay, according to this opinion, and according to this opinion, this is what we do. One should lengthen the tkiyas of tashrat no less than 18 bursts. Shezeu shir trua shall say the tashrat, because that's the size of the trua of that set. The trua of that set is both shvarim and trua combined. The hainu, which is gimel genicha, is 3 moans. The gimel yavava is biyachad and 3 yavavas, and each yavava is 3 tamutin. Shem lepachas yudches tamutin, which is no less than 18 tamutin, which is 18 blasts. Okay, now when we finish this thing, I'm going to do a shtickle demonstration on the shvarim, because it's complicated. People get confused.
Even in the Torah.
Yeah.
You're adding to it.
Yeah.
Does the tekiya need to be as long as?
No.
you're adding to it?
No. The tekiya has to be as long as you're required to do that, even if you end up doing longer. As you said, now each shever in that set could be anything a little bit less than 18 bursts. Because in this set, until you've reached the amount of the entire trua, you haven't reached the size of a tekiya. In that set, the trua is shvarim and tekiya. Shvarim and trua, which means the tekiya of that set is as long as a shvarim and trua, which is 18 bursts. So if your shever is 16 bursts, you haven't made the tekiya yet, so you're still in the category of shever. So in that set, you can have very long shvarim, in theory. Not recommended practice, but it's theory. You could do that. As long as no breaths, we'll see. Right? But your shever should not be as long as 9 bursts, because that would be the same size as your tekiya of the next set. Because that's going to be your tekiya in the next set in tarat, right? And it's going to look like you just did a tekiya from that set as a shever here. Even though for this set, it's considered a shever because the tekiya here became longer because the trua is longer in this set. Following? Yeah?
Because the Torah is combined with shvarim.
Because in this case, the trua and shvarim make up the Torah's trua. So your tekiya is longer. So your shever could be longer. As long as your shever is less than the tekiya, it's considered shever. But in terms of the visuals, the person who's listening to all 30 blasts, he hears a shever at the beginning, it's the same size as your tkiya at the end. So it's kind of awkward. So keep your shever under 9 tamutin, 9 bursts. At least it's less than your smallest tkiya. Following? Sorry?
Don't do it
True.
Yeah, no one does a shever that long anyway, but in theory. Sorry? Your shever shouldn't be as long as, should be less than your smallest tkiya. Your smallest tkiya, the shever of Tashrat, 2 is true. Shever is 2. So each of one of those shvarim, each shever, should be less than your smallest tkiya.
Oh, so each one of the 3.
Even though in Tashrat, your tkiya is longer, and which would mean in theory, your shever could also be longer, because it's longer.
As long as another tkiya.
Exactly. Don't do as long as a tkiya in another set. That's right. But if you did do so, and you did, let's say your shever was as long as 16 tamutin, as long as 16 bursts, in Tashrat, you're yotzer. Because in this order, in this set, you haven't reached tkiya yet. Because in this set, tkiya is the size of 18 bursts, covering both the shvarim and the teruah. Right? And again, this tashat is the same thing as tarat. When we say the tashat, when it comes to tashat, which is tkiya, shvarim, tkiya, tzarech laharech, but tkiya is kishir tes tamutin. Your tkiya should be as long as 9 bursts. Shezeu shir truah shasei aseder, because that's the amount of truah in this order, in this set. In this set, your truah is what we call shvarim, and each shever is 3 bursts, making a total of 9 bursts. So the tkiya of the tashat and the tarat are the same size. But the tkiya of the tashrat has to be longer because your truah is longer inside. And therefore your shever should not be as long as your tkiya, or as long as what the tkiya could be, which is, in other words, if you decide to do a long tkiya, it doesn't make you now allowed to make a longer shvarim. Your shvarim has to be shorter than what you're required to do in that set for a tkiya. And in that set for a tkiya, you're only required to do 9 bursts length for your tkiya, and therefore your shvarim have to be less than that. Each shever should be less than that. Following? Yeah? Yeah? Sorry?
I think so.
Just make sure that the key is a little bit longer.
No. It's not about you. Your shvarim cannot reach what the minimum tkiya of that set is.
Not the shvarim.
Each individual shever cannot reach the length of what your tkiya is allowed to be in that set. So if your tkiya in that set is only the length of 9 bursts, then your shever has to be at least less than 8 burst length. Right? Whereas in Tashrat, you have more time because your tkiya is longer. Your minimum size for your tkiya is the size of 18 bursts. Therefore, your shever in theory could be the length of 16 bursts.
Then your tkiya is another.
But you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that because it shouldn't look bigger than the tkiya of another set. Even though be'etzem, it's Tashat, and Tarat are really unrelated because they're 3 different opinions, and you're doing the mitzvah 3 times, if you will, each time a different version. So your shever of Tashat has no connection to your tkiya of Tarat. Tarat. But still, it shouldn't because the visuals are no good. But if you did, you're yotzer. Because in that set, it was a shever. Because in that set was less than the tkiya of that set. Following? Yeah. Even if your tkiya happens to be longer or shorter, it's a question of what it's supposed to be. Following?
People shouldn't think that was a tkiya.
Exactly. But in the case where a person did shever in tashat, right? Tkiya, shvarim, tkiya, where there the minimum length is 9 bursts. If he did a shever, if he did do a shever, as long as 9 bursts, he'd not fill his obligations. Because it's no longer a shever anymore. It became a tkiya of that set. Because tkiya in that set is a minimum of 9 bursts. Length of minimum 9 bursts. Right? Okay, is that clear? Okay.
When you say minimum 9 bursts, you're talking about all
length
of the shvarim together.
Yes, which means each shever should be at least the size of 3 bursts. Each single shever should be 3, totaling 9, and thus your tkiya has to be the length of 9, and thus your shever has to be under 9. Each individual shever has to be under 9, because otherwise it becomes a tkiya of that set.
You're blowing multiple times.
I've also heard it's more rare, but you have sometimes blowers that's like they're true. It's like do, where that is different than like do.
Right. So it should be 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, which means it's important to know that, because let's just say you're doing 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, right? And you're doing a shever. Well, let's say if you do 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, right? Then how big is by time, and if you did a shever 2, that might be enough for 9 blasts already.
Right.
And now your shever is too big already. Now your Shevar is too big already. That's
It
right.
all depends. It seems it's all depending on the true. How the true is.
That's
really
correct. It all comes down to the trua.
Because some people's true is do, and then you hear people say do.
Yeah. It should be 2, like you should be able to hear the individual bursts.
Okay. So 9 of like.
Yeah, 2.
If you do machine gun,
No. What I'm saying is that if your trua is tiny, if your truas are tiny, then it shortens the amount you can do for a shever. Because how long does it take you to do 9 bursts? That was 9. And if I go to, I've already hit over 9. So that's and I didn't even do one of my, and that would make a shever too long, right? So you have to be able to space those out. So it's best to do 2, and you can count in your head 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then the next.
I mean, we don't have. It's a shame. We can't hear how to do it.
There are people who write it out 2. I'll tell you. I'll show you in a minute what they wrote about the Rebbe. Okay, so I can show you now. So the best way to do it is if you're doing it trua, like you said, to it's clear 9 shvarim, 9 truas, and then your shever, if you're doing it like just the way Halachos says to do it, is just 3 blasts. That's it. That's it. But what the Rebbe used to do is, and this is, if you don't know how to do it, don't do it because you're gonna mess it up. And I'm not so sure I know how to do it 100%. I'll tell you what it says in the books how the Rebbe did it. The real chiddush of the Rebbe is not the little dots at the end. You know, people go 2. That 2 is, the Rebbe used to do that, but it's not the real chiddush the Rebbe's blowing. The real chiddush the Rebbe's blowing is that as opposed to just going 2, as opposed to it was like a sing to the thing. 2, and then 2. Right? So, but if you don't know how to do it right, it ends up coming out like as 2 shvarim, 2.5 shvarim, or 4 shvarim, instead of actual 3 shvarim that are waving. And it's something I can't do it properly, so I usually try not to do it. But it's something like. So it's right, it's 2, but the chiddush here is that they went 2. So it actually sounds much more like moaning, because moaning is not just a straight sound. It goes, it's like it's up and down. The person moaning. So it sounds much more like moaning when you do it that way. 2.
The way you did the true, it seems maybe just most people aren't doing it 100%. But let's say you go into Shofar.
People doing rapid fire.
The trues are very, very fast.
I recommend going slower. No, let me put it this way: someone who heard that I would do it the way this way, and they do it that way, you know.
Yeah, I'm not complaining.
Right, but if you're not sure, do what the Shulchan Aruch here says. You know, do it the way it says. That's why I'm suggesting that even unless you know how to do that 2, which I don't have it mamish down pat, so I stick to just and that's it.
you don't do it 2 at the end.
Maybe a little bit, but it's the real chiddush is not the little 2. That the real chiddush is that's going 2. That the waving part of it is what is the chiddush. That it sounds like a moan, not just the following. Okay, I want to finish before 9 o'clock, and we can. Okay, so up to everybody. You want to continue tomorrow night, or should we jet this? Maybe to continue tomorrow night because it's the halachos of taking breath, and we have to get this down pat. Sorry? Yeah? Tomorrow night, Eden? Okay, so we'll continue tomorrow night with the halachos. It's not going to take much longer. It's only maybe half an hour, 35 minutes to get through the halachos of when to take a breath is number 1. And what's going to take more time, just to remember all the details, is when do you correct yourself under what kind of mistake you made?
So you just take a breath between each thing. No? So
We're going to learn. Yeah, but you have to be conscious of it, because if you're not conscious of it and you don't take the breath, you have to start over again. And it's no weird to start over again when you miss those breaths. Exactly. That's why I was saying. That's actually why I was saying. That's why I was actually saying that you should bring this paper with you, and if you're going 2 guys at a time, which you should, have the other guy literally point at it, and then and it's much better than doing it wrong, because otherwise you make a mistake when you go back. Sorry, the visual is very easy. And he shows you the length, and then the words, if you're comfortable with the words, you see the words, tkiya, shvarim, trua, and the person listening can tell you how long your tkiya is, and then move his finger when you're ready to move over. And your breath should be between each, but we're going to see there's one exception when you can get away with it. We'll see. We're going to see.
Yeah, but the main thing with your breath is You're taking in the middle of one of the kiyos, most people don't take a breath and all that.
You have to. If you're not yotze, if it's in one breath.
What?
You're not yotze if you don't take a breath at the right time.
Between one of the one, look, the key, decide to take a breath, and won't continue. That's no good.
Even no, but if you skip a breath, if you go tkiya, if you go taraf without taking a breath between tkiya and trua and between trua and tkiya, you weren't yotze. If you go like this,
You can't really do it.
if you do that, you're not yotze. Because I did not take a breath between tkiya and the trua. We're going to learn more of the details of that tomorrow. When it's changing all that. All right.
Between each one, you have to take a breath.
We're going to learn all the details of Mitzvah tomorrow.